They laughed at me at my grandfather's funeral, while my cousins walked out with millions. I stood there clutching a single plane ticket like it was a cruel joke. The shame burned deeper than any words, like I had never mattered to him, like I was nothing more than the outsider of my own blood. My name is Aiden Parker, and that was the day everything broke inside me, and the day the truth began to unfold. The velvet curtains of the country club ballroom hung heavy in the October air, muffling every cough and whispered anticipation. Rows of polished shoes tapped impatiently on marble floors, restless under the weight of black Armani suits and glittering jewelry. Faces I barely recognized, faces bound to me by blood but never by affection, leaned forward in their chairs as if the lawyer at the front were a magician about to reveal the trick that would crown them kings. His voice carried evenly, practiced, as he read line after line. One cousin was granted control of the company, a kingdom dressed in profit margins and prestige. Another received the penthouse in Manhattan, a slice of skyline and luxury that most people only ever dreamed of. A niece squealed when her name was tied to the yacht moored in Newport, her phone already raised as though the news itself were content for her followers. Then silence. A pause too long, the kind that thickens the air. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, pulled a thin envelope from the stack, and called my name. It was small, creased at the corners, the ink smudged by a hand no longer alive. I tore it open to find a single plane ticket, San Francisco. One way. The hush broke instantly into laughter, sharp and merciless. Someone behind me muttered, loud enough for the whole room to catch. "Guess that's his way of shipping you off for good." Heat burned in my chest, every heartbeat pounding like betrayal. Yet beneath the sting of humiliation, something flickered, a strange certainty that this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the first move in a game I hadn't realized I was playing. Back in Ohio, the quiet walls of my apartment seemed to close in on me as I stared at the folded ticket on the table. It mocked me with its simplicity. A single destination printed in bold letters, San Francisco. I spent sleepless nights weighing the two paths in front of me, cling to the safety of routine, grading essays and teaching lectures, or throw myself into the unknown with nothing more than a one-way ticket and a whisper of doubt. My mother noticed the war in my face before I spoke a word. She placed her hand gently on mine and said, almost like she'd been waiting years to say it, "Go." Sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest secrets. Her voice broke through my hesitation. By dawn, my bag was packed. The flight was as cheap as it looked, wedged between a man who snored through the safety instructions and a woman guarding both armrests. I felt the sting of humiliation all over again. Every turbulence jolted me back to the question, why me? Why this? My eyes kept falling to the ticket. And that's when I noticed it, faint pencil markings in the corner, the year 1962. My chest tightened. I didn't know why, but that number followed me all the way across the country like a ghost. When we landed, I shuffled through the crowded terminal, ready to slip out unnoticed, until I saw it. A man in a weathered suit holding a sign with my name. Aiden Parker. He was older, gray at the temples, eyes sharp despite his age. He walked up and, without preamble, handed me an envelope sealed in familiar handwriting. Inside, just a single line. "If you trust, you will understand the truth." The old lawyer led me through the winding streets near the San Francisco docks, past shuttered shops and rusted chains that clinked in the wind. At the end of a deserted lane stood a warehouse, its wood siding weathered by salt and years. The heavy door creaked as it opened, releasing a musty air thick with dust and memory. Inside, rows of filing cabinets and stacks of boxes lined the walls. He guided me to one in particular, a chest scarred with age, its hinges groaning as I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs curled at the edges. My grandfather in California, younger, smiling in ways I had never seen, standing beside people I didn't recognize. Maps, deeds, and brittle letters filled the chest. But one item made my breath catch, a detailed sketch of a vineyard in Napa Valley, complete with boundaries and a name etched at the top. Tucked beneath it was a letter, folded crisp, the ink dark as though written yesterday. "Go there. The truth waits where I began. The weight of the revelation pressed down on me as I pieced it together. My grandfather had lived an entire life here, a life no one in the East had spoken of. The lawyer's eyes lingered on me, as if he already knew what I was discovering. My hands trembled as the truth took shape. This wasn't just about land or money. It was about a family no one had ever told me existed. The ticket wasn't humiliation. It was an invitation, and it threatened to rewrite everything I thought I knew. The road into Napa wound like a ribbon through hills drenched in vines. The air scented faintly of grapes ripening under the sun. I followed the faded map from the wooden box until the dirt drive opened to reveal a stone estate, its walls weathered by time, yet standing with an undeniable dignity. My chest tightened as if I were stepping into a place that already knew me. The heavy door creaked open, and a woman appeared at the threshold. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, her eyes brimming with tears she made no attempt to hide. She introduced herself simply, "Evelyn." Her voice trembled as she added, "I was your grandfather's first wife." She welcomed me inside, her hand brushing the walls as though every stone held a memory. The house smelled of oak barrels and old paper. On the mantel were photographs. My grandfather, impossibly young, his smile unguarded, standing beside Evelyn in the vineyard. In one frame, he held a small boy with dark curls, a son whose life had ended long before mine began. Evelyn's voice caught as she whispered, "He always spoke of a grandson in the East, the only one he trusted." She pressed a worn leather folder into my hands. My name was scrawled across the first page of legal documents, stamped and signed. The vineyard was mine, transferred lawfully before his death. My pulse thundered as if the weight of the land itself had been set upon my shoulders. Then Evelyn told me the truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. My grandfather had lived two lives, one draped in boardrooms and wealth on the East Coast, the other rooted in soil and devotion here in California. One was built for appearances, the other for love. That night, Evelyn opened a battered laptop, its screen flickering before the video began to play. My grandfather's face filled the frame, his voice gravelly but steady. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "The company is drowning in debt," he confessed. "The New York townhouse is mortgaged 3 times over. The yacht belongs to the bank. Everything they inherited is a hollow shell." He leaned closer, eyes sharp even through the pixelated grain. "I gave them what they thought they wanted, but with you, I left what they could never understand, truth and value that lasts." The words cut through me. For years I had been the overlooked one, the outsider at family gatherings. And now, with a single revelation, the board had been flipped. The ticket hadn't been a punishment, but a map. It had led me not to humiliation, but to a legacy alive and thriving, a vineyard that produced wine and wealth with every harvest. The realization struck with the force of betrayal and vindication intertwined. While my family in the East celebrated their supposed windfall, they had been handed shackles of debt. The one they mocked, held the only key to something real. The game my grandfather had been playing wasn't about money at all. It was about who would see beyond the glitter to the truth. And without knowing it, I had been chosen. News about the hidden vineyard traveled faster than wildfire. Within days, my phone buzzed with articles splashed across headlines. Secret heir found in California. Teacher turns millionaire overnight. By the time the story reached Connecticut and New York, the narrative twisted into something venomous. To them, I wasn't a grandson fulfilling a grandfather's will. I was the thief who had stolen what was rightfully theirs. While their fortunes were collapsing under the weight of debt-laden mansions and sinking companies, I stood on land that poured out wealth with each harvest. That contrast festered into rage. Soon, sleek black cars began appearing at the vineyard gates. Engines idled while tinted windows lowered just enough to reveal furious eyes. Voices rose in accusation. Fists pounded against iron bars. The vineyard's tranquility cracked under the noise of entitlement. One morning, I stepped outside to find a swarm of reporters. Microphones were shoved toward me, cameras flashing as though I were a criminal dragged into daylight. The headlines screamed before I could answer. Broke school teacher seizes family empire. Their questions weren't questions at all. They were accusations, dripping with the venom my relatives had fed them. It didn't stop there. A thick envelope soon arrived by certified mail. A summons. My cousins had filed suit, demanding the court strip me of everything. The date was set for a public hearing. My stomach knotted, but my mind circled back to my grandfather's words, echoing from that grainy video. Sometimes, the only way to teach is to let them fall into the trap they built for themselves. The courtroom smelled of polish and paper, but beneath it ran the raw stench of hostility. My relatives filled the benches in tailored suits, their smirks sharp enough to cut. Their attorney stood tall, accusing me of deceit, of trickery, of exploiting a frail old man. Each word landed like a hammer, but I stayed silent. The judge asked for evidence. That was when the old lawyer I had met in San Francisco rose from the back, carrying a sealed envelope. My heart jolted as he stepped forward. His voice, though frail, was steady. He presented a document signed and notarized by my grandfather, a second will. The room froze as he read. I, Roland Whitmore, leave all California assets, vineyard, estate, and winery operations, exclusively to my grandson, Aiden Parker. The silence shattered. My relatives erupted, some shouting in fury, others collapsing into bitter tears. Their lawyer's face drained of color as the judge confirmed the document's validity. That moment revealed the truth in its cruel symmetry. My grandfather had crafted a double snare. The East Coast inheritance was nothing but gilded ruin, a poisoned gift for those blinded by greed. The West Coast legacy, the real fortune, was safeguarded for the one who never begged. As I walked out of the courthouse, the California sun seemed sharper, the air lighter. For the first time, I understood what my grandfather had truly left behind. Wealth wasn't the land or the vines. It was the brutal, undeniable lesson etched into their downfall. Greed always tightens its own noose. The courthouse felt like a closed chapter. I'd walked out convinced the worst had been said and signed, convinced the law had its say and whatever fallout would unfold in daylight. Then, in the dark between midnight and morning, my phone sliced through the quiet. His voice was ragged, as if he'd been shouting or crying or both. "Aiden, we've lost everything. The company collapsed today. The bank took the house. The yacht's gone. We don't know what to do. Please help us." For a moment, the line was only a thin thread of sound and raw need. I stared through the kitchen window at the rows of vines, silvered by moonlight. The leaves whispered in the breeze like distant applause, or perhaps like the many voices that had laughed at me in that country club ballroom. The memory of those faces, slick smiles, condescending glances, arrived at once, as sharp and stupid as a stone thrown at a window. There was a heat in my chest I couldn't name at first. Anger, vindication, a cold satisfaction that felt dangerous. I could hear the easy retorts forming in my head. Let them swim in the consequence of the choices they made. Let them taste the bitter fruit of their own hunger. The thought of it settled into me like a poison I might enjoy. Then, almost without thinking, I heard my grandfather's voice from the old video, not as a sound but as a shadow across the room. Be better than they are. It landed differently this time, not as reproach, but as instruction, an odd requirement that felt heavier than any heirloom. I watched my reflection in the glass, a man in a worn flannel shirt, someone who had never learned to ask for anything, much less receive it. I thought about what help could mean. Money was simple: transfer, sign, forget, but money alone would be a bandage. The idea of handing them a check, of undoing the lesson my grandfather had woven through this whole thing, felt like surrender to the old system that bred the very greed that ruined them. My thumb hovered above the screen. The call went quiet on the other end. Maybe he was listening for me to say yes. The vineyard behind the house breathed under the moon. Somewhere in those rows, the next harvest was forming, indifferent to human vanity and guilt. I made a choice that night, but not the one they expected. I told him I would come, tomorrow, not to cut him a check, not to prop up a sinking life. I told him I would listen, and that he would come alone, not in lawyers' suits or with camera crews in tow. When I hung up, my heart was pounding in a way that felt less like rage and more like resolve. Dawn would bring decisions, and I intended for mine to be more than punishment or charity. It would be a test. They arrived at the vineyard in the late morning, stepping out of borrowed cars with clothes that no longer fit the image they once projected. The tailored suits were wrinkled, their jewelry pawn shop thin, their eyes hollowed by nights spent bargaining with banks and lawyers. The arrogance I remembered from the funeral had been stripped away, leaving only desperation. I met them at the gates and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm not giving you money," I said plainly, my voice carrying across the gravel courtyard. Their shoulders sagged, a few mouths opened in protest, but I lifted a hand to stop them. "What I will give you is a chance." Confusion rippled through the group. They expected a handout, not an ultimatum. I led them down the rows of vines, explaining what the chance meant, carrying crates of grapes so heavy they left bruises on the arms, trimming the vines under the unrelenting sun until sweat stung their eyes, learning the patience of oak barrels and fermentation in a cellar where silence spoke louder than excuses. If they wanted to eat, if they wanted shelter, they would earn it in the same dirt my grandfather had trusted me with. The first test came quickly. As soon as I handed out work gloves, two cousins ripped them off and stormed back toward their cars, muttering curses about humiliation. The sound of their engines faded down the road, leaving the others standing in awkward silence. Then, one by one, the rest picked up the shears, the buckets, the shovels. Days passed. Blisters turned to calluses. Sunburned skin peeled. Complaints gave way to quiet focus. And then, one evening, it happened. My cousin, the same one who had once pointed a phone at my face to broadcast my humiliation, stood frozen in the cellar, staring at rows of finished bottles gleaming under low light. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "For the first time in my life, I feel like I actually made something real." Tears streaked her face before she could hide them. Not all of them stayed. A few walked away after a week, too proud to bend. But the ones who endured began to change. Their eyes no longer darted toward wealth, but toward the land, the fruit, the wine slowly becoming itself. Some found humility, others a new sense of belonging. The lesson wasn't in the paycheck, but in the soil under their nails. They had come begging for money and left with the chance to understand what my grandfather had always known. That value is not inherited, it's earned. Months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and transformed. I still taught part-time in Ohio, standing before a chalkboard and teenagers who rolled their eyes at history until I managed to slip a story in that caught their attention. Teaching was never about money for me. It was about purpose, and I couldn't let it go. My mother had moved into a small house just beyond the vineyard. For the first time in decades, I saw her at peace, tending flowers in the morning sun instead of dragging herself home from endless shifts. The lines of exhaustion on her face began to soften, replaced by something gentler, freer. The vineyard itself thrived. Rows of vines stretched heavy with promise, the cellar alive with the scent of oak and fermenting grapes. It became more than a business. It was a place of renewal. Some of my relatives who had chosen to stay worked alongside us, their pride stripped away, their hands learning patience and sweat. For the first time, they contributed to something lasting. One evening, while checking the cellar, I found a single bottle tucked in the back, its label handwritten in the familiar scrawl, Heritage 2025 for Aiden. My breath caught as I held it, the weight heavier than glass. Later, I sat at the old wooden chessboard, the pieces arranged in quiet symmetry. My grandfather's words echoed, "Trust yourself. Play the unseen move." I smiled then, because I finally understood. The true inheritance wasn't wealth at all. It was trust, values, and the courage to choose differently.